Welcome everyone. Today we have Jerry Marzinsky returning along with a special guest, which we'll call Anon today. So welcome. Jerry spoke to us previously and he's the co-author of an amazing journey into the psychotic mind, breaking the spell of the ivory tower. And it was so interesting hearing about Jerry's work because during his 35-year career as a psychotherapist, he discovered working with schizophrenics that what psychiatry maintains is the voices that schizophrenics are hearing are hallucinations and they're caused by chemical imbalances in the brain. He actually found through his, working experience with these people that the voices were in fact very real and they were conscious parasitic entities. So it's so interesting to see that change in it. It's really a paradigm, and unfortunately for so many schizophrenics in the past, like I know my mum's side, her family were all really severely medicated and suffered greatly from that, and were really just being tranquilized their whole lives. And this negative voices that they would talk about really just became a symptom of the schizophrenia. And now we're learning to realize that, these voices are often related to childhood traumas or childhood abandonment, even drug use or sickness. And these kind of things can actually open us up and make us more vulnerable to these conscious entities actually attacking us. And I've been reading Jerry's book, which I would highly recommend. I found it just incredible. And it's so interesting seeing there how the Gnostics, so in ancient knowledge from 2000 years ago, they were very aware of the archons. So these are spiritual parasites, as they describe them, that would like to attach to people and drain their energy, affect their mood, affect their behavior. And isn't it so interesting that we had all this knowledge 2000 years ago and it's, been lost or hidden perhaps. And yet, looking out on the world stage at the moment, we can see so much parasitic behavior and really people just behaving like archons. It really points to just, how much trauma is really in the population. And, it's so important the work that Jerry's doing. And now with Anon coming here today to share his experiences, like if we can actually talk about these topics that have been considered quite taboo, we can develop ways to heal. And I love Jerry's work because it really inspires people and it helps them comprehend that these voices aren't actually them. These voices are something separate to them, and then therefore they can really be released. They can be healed. And that's the goal, is for the individuals and collective and our collective to heal. So I'd love for you to start, Jerry, and explain, how you come across the patterns and the voices before we hand over to Anon to share his story.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that. I'll talk a little bit about how I came to this conclusion. And one thing the establishment doesn't allow to happen is they don't give people who've heard voices any platform to speak. If they go to a psychiatrist and they keep complaining about the voices, they're going to drug them silly. That's their only answer. That's all they have. But they're not going to have an answer for the cure of schizophrenia until they understand that the voices drive schizophrenia and that the voices are not hallucinations. They're very, very real. And every time psychiatrist tells a patient they're hallucinations, he has no evidence to back that up at all, none. All right. So a little bit about me. I graduated from graduate school in counseling and psychology and went to work at probably the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet at the time. It had 200 big red brick buildings and over 3,000 acres. So there was virtually every psychiatric diagnosis you ever saw somewhere in there. And for somebody who was fascinated with abnormal psychology and was an adrenaline junkie, that was like candy. So trying to figure out what was going on. One of the first things I noticed that was odd were psychiatrists were getting beaten up at a much higher rate than any of the other staff. It made no sense to me. It was like they only spent like 20 minutes a month with schizophrenics, and the schizophrenics were pounding them. They were getting beat up at the same rate as attendants that were on the wards with psychotic patients all the time. So coming out of grad school, I was taught that the voices that schizophrenics heard were hallucinations, and none of us, had any access to a psychiatric population. So you had to believe whatever the professors were telling you. There was no way to go check it out. You can't walk into a state hospital and say, "Hey, let me talk to some of your patients," or walk into a prison and say, "Let me talk to some of your psychotic inmates." You just don't have access to these people. You might have access to one, maybe two at the most, but to really study them, you can't access. They won't let you in. They won't let you into a mental health center. They won't let you into a psychiatric hospital. And in my entire career, I have never seen any researchers on the front lines trying to study schizophrenics or what the voices were saying. So here we were taught in graduate school and undergraduate that the voices were hallucinations, and that they were caused by first they blamed it on genetics. Then back in the 70s, they needed an explanation for how their antidepressants work. So they just made one up. They said, "Oh yeah, the mental illness is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain." All right. What proof did they have? Only their arrogance. That's it. Just pure arrogance. They'd done no research on it. They had nothing to back that statement up, but yet it was being taught in graduate schools. It was being taught in medical schools. It was being taught to psychiatrists. So you just take their word for it. I thought they were hallucinations also, and I thought they were, being hallucinations. I thought they were random. Like word salad. Like they wouldn't make any sense because hallucinations are random. They're all over the place. They're up, down, all around, everywhere. But I assumed they were like word salad until I saw patients walking around talking to somebody, and their sentences were complete sentences. It was like they were talking to somebody on a telephone. You could hear one side of the conversation, but not the other. And the part you could hear was very coherent, and it was in response to whatever they were hearing, somewhere else. And I saw that for so many years that now when I see these guys with these earbuds, with nothing else talking, and I'm right away, it's like another crazy guy. It's like and I have to kind of, like, oh, it's just those earbud things. So, here they were walking around talking like they were talking on a phone. Their conversation was coherent. I heard one that they were arguing with their voices who were telling them to leave the hospital grounds. And here they were leaving the hospital grounds, arguing with their voices all along the way. So it wasn't word salad like I thought it would be, the voices. And I remember being in the psychiatrist's office once where he was evaluating one of my patients, and the patient was complaining about the voices. And the psychiatrist said, "Oh, they're hallucinations, just ignore them." And I went, "Well, that's odd. I mean, you think they would have tried that before, So I called that same patient in 2 weeks later, and I said, "How'd that work for you?" He said, "It didn't work at all. They got louder." And I went, "That's interesting." So once I hear that from one of them, I started asking others. And it was true. Every single one I asked, if they tried to ignore the voices, they got louder. All right. So what the psychiatrist was telling them was wrong on 2 points. One is that, they come across very real to these patients. And if they try to express that to a psychiatrist, they end up getting drugged. They end up getting locked up and drugged. So what I saw was odd is psychiatrists were telling these patients, "Oh, they're hallucinations, so, just ignore them," until the psychiatrist found out that the voices were telling the patient to kill himself. And then all of a sudden things took a 180-degree turn. The psychiatrist jumped like he was being stuck with a hot poker rod, threw the guy on suicide watch, locked the doors, and drugged him silly, and kept him in there until he said he was no longer suicidal. So here you got them saying one thing out of one side of their mouth, and acting another way, when they found out that the hallucinations were telling them to kill themselves. And they drugged them senseless. So if they complained too much about the voices, they would just increase the drugs. So the patients learned that, and they were like, I'm not going to tell them anything. They just drug me more and more, and it's not stopping the voices. It just, it makes me care less about them, but it doesn't stop them. So they learned not to complain to staff about their voices and to pretty much keep them to themselves. They were very hesitant to talk about them, and it took some doing to get them to talk about them. So, but what I saw was none of the staff were the least bit curious about what these voices were telling the patients. They were like, oh, they're hallucinations, just that's it, that's all they are. They didn't care, they weren't the least bit interested in what these patients were being told. And it was looking to me like it was those voices that were driving their behavior, because they would do some wacky stuff that just made no sense, and it was always destructive to their path. The more patients I spoke to, the more I noticed that these voices had a negative pattern to them. They weren't all over the place. They weren't like talking good one day and mediocre the other day, or negative then. No, they were consistently negative all the time. And I started wondering, what is it that keeps these things on a negative path? There's something that must hold them down from being random, otherwise they'd be all over the place. What power holds them so they're consistently negative? So I had that in the back of my mind, and I'm like, what is going on here? That, if they're running a patterns, they can't be hallucinations. So what was it that stopped them from being random? And then I saw a second pattern, and this was, a couple of years into my work at the state hospital. The second pattern was they were consistently adverse to anything religious. The Bible, preachers going to church, they would stay on the ward when everybody else was down with the preacher having a ice cream social. They were consistently resistant when the patient tried to read the Bible or go to church. They would either get louder in the church, or they would shut up, or if they were real strong, they would actually drive the patient right out of the church. But usually they would start babbling to try to interfere with whatever the preacher was trying to say. So I kept asking patients, what are they saying? What are they doing? What are they acting like? And, they were real suspicious, because they'd never had anybody who really wanted to know what the voices were. And they were, they'd already been burned a bunch of times telling psychs that they were hearing voices, and ended up in front of the psychiatrist and being drugged. So that was a barrier that had to be overcome. It took me like 3 years to figure out, how to approach them. And every little bit I learned about the voices, I would throw it in there, and I would tell them, okay, this is what I know so far, and whatever you can tell me would help. So everybody I had on my caseload who was hearing voices, I would ask them about the voices. And one day, one of them complained to a psychiatrist that I was asking him about his voices, and they didn't like it. And the voices didn't like it. So I got pulled up in front of the psychiatrist and ordered. He told me, the voices are hallucinations. You asking questions about them is only going to reinforce them and make them stronger. Don't do it anymore. So that happened twice. They didn't even want you. They didn't allow you to investigate the voices. If they caught you, they would pull you up and say, no, you don't do that. So, it's like, what's with that? What's with that? So I had to stay under the radar for a long time after that. They didn't tolerate investigation into the voices. So I had to be real careful. I got called up twice on that by two different psychiatrists. So, at the state hospital, it was different. The unwritten rule was you don't say anything to a patient that might upset them, because you don't know what they were going to do, and, they were always understaffed. When I got to the prison, after 7 years at the state hospital, I went back to graduate school to a PhD program for a couple of years. Hated it, absolutely hated it. It didn't match what I'd seen on the front lines. Left and went to Arizona, started off with a job working psych crisis in a hospital emergency room, then moved over to a mental health center. and then moved over to the psychology department in one of the large prisons here in Tucson. Okay. So it was there I was really able to investigate what the voices were saying. And I always had around me a group of maybe 10 or 15 inmates who would tell me what the voices were saying in real time. So I could actually, speak to them through the inmate, and they would speak back. It was usually abusive stuff. They didn't like me very much. But, I was watching them, and these patterns would just keep coming. They just kept increasing. So one of the patterns was, the patient would always self-sabotage. They would always do something to get themselves in trouble, especially when I was at the state hospital. We were working for Voc Rehab in a psychiatric rehab center, and they would just get close to graduating, and then they'd do something to screw it up. They'd stop taking their meds, or they'd do something else. They were constantly sabotaging themselves. So one of my last year at Central State Hospital, I had one girl who she was doing great in cosmetology school. She was about to graduate. Then she went off her meds for the third time, and we had a rule there. And the third time you went off your meds, you were discharged, because if you couldn't stay on your meds, you're not going to be able to stay sane. Back then, they had no other treatment for schizophrenia. Now we do, and it doesn't involve medications, but back then there wasn't. So she went off, and we were about to discharge her. Her mother called me and said, please don't do that. I can't handle her. I'll come up and I'll talk to you with her. So she came up one Friday afternoon, and the three of us met in my office. And the mother and I are almost begging her, you're doing great in cosmetology. You were about to graduate. Then you went off your meds and you did this. This is the third time you did this. You knew what would happen if you went off those meds. Why did you do it? And she said, you won't believe me. I said, well, try me. I've heard some weird things while I was here. I don't think you're going to shake me up. And she said, okay. The voices told me that the psychiatrists were poisoning me with the psych meds that they were giving me. And they pointed to the side effects as being as the poison, which was actually happening, because those drugs are toxic. They're some of the most toxic drugs used in medicine today. Those side effects are awful, and they're awful because those meds are toxic, but they calm the person down, and they allow, the hospital staff to control them. They allow them to, they knock out entire populations with this stuff, and it's very
the
cheap.
Tranquilizers. That's all they are, is tranquilizers.
The
They're major tranquilizers. They gork you out. It's like pouring syrup in a radio receiver. So at the prison, I didn't have to worry about asking patients about the voices. And I was learning more and more about them. I was actually interacting with the voices through the patients. They would tell me what the voices said. I would answer back. I would give them exercises to start disrupting the patterns that the voices were running, wondering what would happen if we could disrupt those patterns. So once we started, I'd give them homework, and I said, try this over the next week and come back next week and tell me what the results were. So I'd had 10 or 15 of them doing the same thing and reporting back as to what effect these exercises had on the voices. And shortly they started coming back telling me that the voices didn't like what I was doing. They didn't like these exercises, and they didn't want them to return to my office. And I said, that's awful strange for a hallucination, huh?
Yeah.
And that was pretty consistent. The voices didn't like being messed with. So I remember one day, one guy I was working with, he was doing pretty good about getting rid of the voices. They were getting less and less, weaker and weaker. And then he turns around as he's leaving my office after a session, and he looks at me and he goes, you know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you? And I just looked at him. I never thought it was. It didn't even cross my mind. And then he turns around and he walks out, and I'm kind of sitting there going, I wonder what he means by that. And I just kind of, shrugged it off. So maybe a couple of weeks later, that same guy came back to my office without an appointment, knocked on the door and said, the voices want to talk to you.
Oh,
And I'm like, they want to talk to me personally? That had never happened before in 25 years. That had never happened. It was always the patient was the intermediary. They would tell me what the voices were saying, and I'd tell them to tell the voices to go stick their head in the toilet or something, but it was always through them. So I brought this fella in, closed the door, and I'm like curious, and I sat back in my chair and I'm looking at him and I'm like, well, what do they got to say? And he looks at me and he goes, his voice changes just a little bit, got a little lower, and he says, you have no right to interfere with our way of life.
wow.
Straight up, our way of life, our plural, and I'm looking at him, that's not him. And he goes, that wasn't me, that was them. He said, those weren't my words. And I'm just sitting there stunned looking at him. Like, that's where my denial system broke. I mean, it just collapsed. I mean, it was already tattered. I already had massive amounts of evidence that these things weren't hallucinations, but I didn't know what they were. With this, that did it. That did it. I mean, it just went.
That was the epiphany, huh?
Well, the epiphany was where my office started crackling, with that one time where this same guy came in and sat down and then he looked like he had a zombie look on his face. I mean, he just didn't look right. And he's just staring at me like he was in a trance. And I'm looking at him, and then my office started crackling like with electricity. It was like a welding torch, crack, 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 crack. And it just went up the wall and round the ceiling and back down again. And, I'm trying to split my attention between the noise and him. And I'm thinking he's going to attack. So I pushed my chair back against the wall. And at one point I asked him, I said, do you hear that? And he doesn't answer. He just stares with this blank stare. And then the thing comes down the wall, jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can by my left leg. And I look down and there's nothing there. Here's this noise coming out of there and there's nothing there. And I'm blown away. I'm just blown away. I'm like, what? It's like Twilight Zone. Do, 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 do. And then he gets up and he goes, I gotta leave. And he shuffles out of there. And I'm like, yeah, go, get the frick out of here. I didn't call him back for 3 or 4 months. But then about 3 or 4 months later, I got my curiosity got the best of me. I called him back and I said, after some small talk, I said, he looked good. He surprised me. I thought he was going to be a wreck. I thought the voices were going to rip him to ribbons, but he looked good, and I said, I was expecting you to be trashed. And he said, no, I'm doing what you told me. I haven't got rid of them, but I'm able to hold them off. And then I started asking him about, well, what happened that day? I said, did you hear that crackling? He goes, I heard it, but I'm surprised you did. And I said, what was that? And he said, that was them. And I said, the voices? And he said, yeah, those were the voices. And I said, what in the blazes were they trying to do? He said, they were trying to scare you off. And I said, well, they did a damn good job of it. So I asked him as he was leaving that day, I asked him, well, you looked weird that whole time, and you kind of shuffled out the door. I said, what was going through your mind when you walked out the door? What were they telling you? And he said, they were telling me to go get a shank, which is a homemade prison knife, and stick it in your gut. And I went, well, I was working with that guy for 6 months. They wouldn't do that. And I said, well, why didn't you do it? He said, I couldn't find one. And I'm like, oh. So right now we have like 28 patterns that these voices run. Okay, so I'm going to quickly read those off. Listen to them as Anon is talking. I'm going to point them out if I can. These voices are energetic beings. They belong to the energy universe. They don't belong to the physical universe. There is no time, there is no space, there is no matter where they are. And matter does not affect them. So you can pour all the psychiatric drugs on the brain you want, and it doesn't bother these things. They still keep jabbering away. They're still doing their damage. They're still not letting the person sleep. And, if the patient complains about it, they drug them until they're drooling. These drugs cure nothing. All they do is suppress psychiatric symptoms. So here they are. They've got a multi-billion-dollar business selling drugs that merely tranquilize people, dope them up, suppress symptoms, but cure absolutely nothing. In order to start on a cure, you have to know that these things are real. You have to know the patterns they run. You have to know what to do about that and how to interfere with the patterns. And there's a number of ways to do that. And there's new energetic therapy coming out now that can go in and what do you call it? De-arm traumas. I mean, just take the emotional sting right out of them. They exist right now and they don't require drugs. So the patterns we found are these voices are negative, they're anti-religious, they foster and create negative emotion. They do that to create a negative emotional energy in the person, and then they suck that energy out. Anon can tell you about that. So they energetically drain their victims. They get louder after sunset for some reason. They get louder when ignored. They foster self-destructive behavior. They foster isolation. They demand the victim's attention. Oh, and by the way, if you compare this with the mainstream media is telling us right now, what they're bombarding us with, it's a one-to-one correlation between what the psychotic voices are telling schizophrenics and what these people are telling us over the mainstream media. Okay, they maneuver for increased control over their victims. They gaslight. They manipulate perception. They have complete access to the victim's memory. Maybe the mainstream media doesn't do that, but these things do, because they're not physical. They can go into the patient's head. They can pull out every rotten thing they've ever done, throw it in their face, and rub it in their face until they turn their energy negative.
They'll take any form of negativity and they will amplify it at their target or their victim. That's what they amplify any negativity that the patient has.
That's right. Or if anything goes wrong, they come and pour gasoline on the fire. They want to generate as much negative emotional energy as possible. They demand that the victim not tell anybody else about their presence, because, oh, you'll be locked up. They'll lock you in a psych ward and they'll drug you. They won't ever let you out of there. So the voices actually tell them.
Nobody will believe what you're going to say. Don't even bother. Nobody's going to listen.
It's true. It's true. That's where it's true. Yeah, you can shut them up temporarily by snapping a rubber band. It'll shut them up for 15, 20 seconds to allow you to do exercises that will disrupt them. So you have to fight back against them. They're like gangsters. Once they get you down, they'll keep kicking and they will not stop.
They're
they will show
bullies.
you
They're
bullies.
Validated bullies.
They're consummate liars. They can't be trusted to keep any bargain that they make. You can't trust anything they say. They lie about everything. Their main goal is to turn your emotional state negative. They consistently steer their victim away from anything that might generate joy. They manipulate feeling without speaking. They short circuit reason. They love boredom. That's the worst thing you could do. If you're hearing voices, the worst thing you could do is allow yourself to get bored, because this is a spiritual battle for your attention. They want to control your attention, and those drugs don't stop that. The voices try to pass themselves off as your thoughts and that they belong to you. And we're told from the time we're little kids that, every thought that goes through our minds belongs to us. Where else could it come from? That's far from true. The voices do not belong to the patient. They come in from another dimension. They are energetic parasites. They want your energy. They're dangerous. More schizophrenics. I think it's the schizophrenic suicide rate is 3 to 5 times that of the general population in the United States. But so is the psychiatric suicide rate. It's right up there with the schizophrenics. It's higher than most other doctors, which is interesting. The voices can affect selective forgetting. They can fill the victim's mind with negative thoughts about themselves and others. They destroy any vestige of a positive self-concept. They attempt to pull their victim away from any consensual reality, the reality that most of us believe in. They use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions, just like hypnosis guys do. They're averse to anything positive and beautiful. They attempt to inform the schizophrenic patient that any attempt to inform the patient, the schizophrenic patient, that the voices are energetic parasites draining them, sets off a reaction. They do not like that. That's the last thing they want the patient to know.
They don't want to be discovered.
Yes, they do not want to be discovered. And I've even been told by some of the voices that if they are, they're punished. Or if they carry on a conversation with me, they're punished. So it goes and goes and goes. But I'm gonna turn this over to Anon now, because he's been there, he's lived it, and I'll be jumping in from time to time if he doesn't point out some of these patterns in his story, because psychiatry and the general population have to understand that if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations.
Exactly.
And if they're not hallucination, if you keep thinking they're hallucinations, you're not playing with the truth. You're playing with a lie, and you're never going to get the true answer to what these things are, what to do about them, as long as you think they're hallucinations. And psychiatry's entire, scam depends on you believing that these things are hallucinations and that mental illness is due to some kind of chemical brain imbalance. And they're still teaching that. They're still putting that out, even though it's been proven over and over long ago that there is no chemical brain imbalance. It's one of the things I saw at the state hospital. The psychiatrist would tell patients, you're hearing voices because you're schizophrenic and you have a chemical brain imbalance, but never did I ever see them give any kind of lab or any kind of test to test for what was the balance of chemicals in the guy's brain that needed to be adjusted.
Oh, they gave me the same line. The doctors gave me the same line when I was in the psychiatric hospital. Oh, it's a chemical imbalance. And I asked them, well, then what's the baseline supposed to be? They just give you a blank stare because they don't have an answer for that. Because if you have a chemical imbalance, like your pH in your pool, you know where it should be, you adjust it accordingly.
Yeah. If
your brain's off, then there should be certain indicators of what's off. What elements or what molecules are off. They have nothing to go by.
No. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be, let alone having anything to fix that chemical imbalance. I mean, it's a complete lie that it was made up by the pharmaceutical companies in 1970 something when Prozac came out. They needed some explanation for how their drugs worked, and they didn't have one. So they made one up, just like they made up all 250 of their psychiatric illnesses. There is not a single test to test for any one of those psychiatric illnesses in that DSM-3, not one. These voices drive schizophrenia. They are energetic beings. They are not hitting the brain with tranquilizers is not going to stop them. It's not going to cure anything. They don't want to cure. They've reduced the research funding for schizophrenia down to some abysmal trickle. I'm sure the pharmaceutical industry and the psychiatric mafia had something to do with it. They're not even looking for a cure. So if you're looking to them to provide you an answer, they're not going to. All they want to do is sell those drugs. That's all they're concerned about, is how much money they can make off of selling psychotropic drugs. And they're making billions off of the sale of antipsychotic drugs that cure absolutely nothing, but rot out your brain with long-term use. And when they found that out, they went nuts. The researchers that weren't under the thumb of big pharma found that long-term use of those antipsychotic drugs will shrink your brain and destroy your peripheral nervous system. Oh, you think they'd stop them? No, they gave them cogentin and other drugs that would tamp down those symptoms of the drug destroying their brain and their nervous system. They didn't care. They just keep collecting the money. It's reprehensible. Well,
I mean, for the short term, the psychotropic drugs can help, right, Jerry? I mean, it's like a 5 or 6 month ordeal, because there's some patients who don't have reached if they weren't on those drugs. But for the long term, forget it. It destroys the patient. It doesn't cure them. It doesn't help them. It just basically rots their brain out.
Well, and also for the ones that are so far out and so dangerous, I mean, that's the only treatment they have for them. If you let them go in society, they're going to hurt or kill somebody. And I've seen the prison release people that I thought would kill somebody within 6 months. Oh, they've done their time. So they give them $50, give them 2 weeks worth of medicine, and go to the ER when you run out. They're not going to get any medicines from the ER. So the mental health system in the Western world is not set up for the patient. It's set up for the profit of the psychiatric mafia, big pharma, and the educational institutions that keep this farce running. It's just a big merry-go-round where they go off their meds, they go into the psychiatric hospital, they're fleeced of thousands of dollars, they're put back on their meds, they go off their meds again 6 months later, and the whole cycle revolves, each time fleecing them of thousands of dollars every time they go through the mental health center or through the psychiatric hospitalization. It is not a system that is curing anything. It's not making anybody better. It's making the psychiatric mafia and big pharma rich. It is not designed for the patient or to cure anything at all. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anon and let him give you the firsthand story. You know, he's been there. I was on the other side of where he was, but he'll give you the patient's eye view here.
I just wanted to say as well, it's just so brave and courageous you coming forward today, Anon, and sharing your story. And it's so important for people to understand the experience and for the whole taboo about voices and, you know, mental health concerns to really just be discussed publicly. And that's really the healing, because like Jerry was saying, you know, all we've been given is these pharmaceutical options, and, you know, hearing stories from survivors of, you know, these kind of experiences, you know, really opens up people to, you know, the possibility that there is real healing out there rather than just band-aids of medication as well. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you, Gabby. And I'm hopefully by telling my story, I can help some of the schizophrenics out there and or those who have family members or friends to understand there's something much more profound going on than just pure mental illness with this. And every time Jerry tells his story and his background, I relive it, hearing what he has to say. You know, the falsity that it's a chemical imbalance, the idea that you just got to drug them up and everything. It really is a spiritual battle, and yes. I consider myself a recovered schizophrenic. And I'm sorry, schizophrenic, that's a misnomer. That is not what is going on here. And
no, it's a spiritual battle.
Absolutely, it is. My experiences occurred, I guess, primarily back from 1989 to 1992. And what happened, I graduated college and I majored in a technical field. I majored in mechanical engineering. So I have a very logical, analytical mind. But I did take some psychology courses. I took general psychology, comparative psychology, and abnormal psychology. So when I started having these experiences myself, I mean, I knew about the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that's used to classify mental illness. I knew about some of these things, and it started happening to me. I was like, whoa. I kind of went into a state of a split mind. Part of me was the participant dealing with it. The other part of me was the observer, the scientist, observing what was going on. So what happened is I got out of college. It was probably about early 1989. And I wanted to read the Bible on my own for the first time, just without any middle person to tell me what it was about or anything. So I was baptized Greek Orthodox, and I attended a Methodist Sunday school growing up, and I was in a Roman Catholic youth group in high school, even though I wasn't Roman Catholic. So I had a little bit of a religious upbringing. It wasn't anything strict or dogmatic. It's just I kind of took it the notion, the idea of, you know, this guy Jesus was teaching us to be a good person, essentially. You know, be genuine, be authentic, be good to others, do what you can to bring a little love into the world. So when I started reading the Bible for the first time on my own, both sections of the New Testament and Old Testament, that's when I would say that these things started happening that I didn't quite understand. There were feelings of, I would say, bouncing back and forth between ecstasy and the darkest pits of despair, kind of going on simultaneously, bouncing back and forth. But what predominantly started happening was something kept telling me that I was a failure in life, to give it up, that I was unworthy, that I shouldn't go on anymore. And there was a whole bunch of things going on back and forth, leading up to, I'd call it a psychotic break, for lack of a better term. But what had happened is, I think I reached a point where I wasn't sleeping anymore. I don't recall actually sleeping. I felt like I went a whole week without sleeping. At the time, I think they put me on lithium. It was a very low dose, though. Yeah,
the voices don't want the voices don't want the patient to sleep, because if they can keep them awake, they're weaker. They can't concentrate. They're more vulnerable to their attacks.
And as I was going through this, I was going back and forth between, was this my own thoughts or is this something external? So, I mean, I wasn't clear until later on in the ordeal what was occurring. And keep in mind, there was no internet back then. So it wasn't like I could go Google something or look something up. You had to rely on books in the library back then. So I felt, at times, I felt like almost like something was trying to possess me. Like like something's trying to push my personality to the side. Something else was coming in. I mean, I remember there was times where my arms and legs were moving and I wasn't the one moving them. There was something else moving them. So I ended up in the ER. I remember my body was thrashing around. It was almost, I remember I couldn't talk. My words were being slurred. I wasn't able to talk or anything. They thought I had a lithium overdose. But I'll tell you, I was in such a state of depression at this point, I couldn't even remember to even take the lithium, to tell you the truth. So after that night in the ER, they said it's psychological. I think they gave me the usual stuff, the MRIs and the EKGs. Nothing was showing up on that. So I was submitted into a psychiatric hospital. I was there for about 4 weeks. This would have been the fall of 1990. So it was all of September, pretty much, of 1990, I was in the psychiatric hospital. And my diagnosis was affective schizophrenic disorder. Now, when I was in the hospital, I remember they gave me all sorts of pills to try, pink ones, blue ones, different combinations. And if that didn't work, they would give you a different combination. I just remember they're giving me all these different pills to take throughout the weeks. Nothing was working.
It's trial and error.
You're a guinea pig. And some of those pills, I mean, just, the side effects were awful. I mean, sometimes I remember extreme dry mouth was one of them. Some days I don't remember what was going on. I was so out of it, like in a zombie state. I remember one particular combination of drugs they had given me. I would turn my head to look at something, and my field of vision would like shift in increments to catch up to where I was looking. I would go back again, and it would kind of go back and forth like that. So really, really disorienting. I hated being on those drugs because I wanted my own mind back. But I was kind of going back and forth to try to figure out what I was dealing with here. And I remember in the hospital for about 48 hours, there was a time period where I kept hearing external voices that were external of me. It was a cacophony of men's, women's, and children's voices. It's almost like when you're sitting attending a movie theater or a play is about to start and you're in the audience and you hear all these conversations going on around you. That's almost like what it felt like. Like there was these multiple conversations going on. And I don't know if they were talking about me or not. They might have been trying to get into my mind or something, but I chose to kind of ignore them or block them. Like I just said, okay, I know I haven't slept well. This is just my mind playing tricks on me. But for about 48 hours there, I was hearing very strong external voices outside of my own head. And none of the pills were working. So finally, they decided to resort to ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy. That's where they will actually give the brain a little shock. So if that didn't work, I was probably going to be confined to a state institution because my health insurance is running out. And there were a lot of other things going on in my world at that point in time. But I remember they gave me the ECT, the very first one. I remember after the very first session, I felt better. I felt like I had my mind back. I felt like the voices had left. I was still at rock bottom.
See, and this is very interesting because the ECT is an electric charge that they put through the brain. It's energy. The voices are energy. And at the state hospital, they'd give ECTs also, but they were much more brutal than what you went through. And the voices would disappear sometime for a week or 2 weeks before they came back. So that goes right in. The voices are energetic, electricity is energetic. It did something to temporarily drive them away.
Only temporarily. And go experience the ECT. It's almost like going to surgery. They give you a muscle relaxant. They have to put you on a respirator because the muscle relaxants are so strong that you can't breathe on your own. And then they give you anesthesia. They knock you out, and then they give a voltage across the brain. Now I got it like in 1990. Thank goodness it wasn't in the 1950s, 1960s, or 1970s. So at least it was a lot more advanced. And they give you the muscle relaxant because otherwise you end up breaking bones and ripping tendons, thrashing all over the place from the having a convulsion, essentially, from the electrical shock going to your brain. But I felt better after the very first one, but they said, no, you have to have at least 6 of these. So they gave me 5 more after that. I think 3 were inpatient, 3 were outpatient. But I felt more like myself. I definitely did. And a few months later, I'll call them very strong thoughts started to come back. And the first one, it was weird. It was like offering me a path to instantaneous wealth, power, and riches if I kind of sold my soul or give up what I thought was my life quest. I would call these things almost like tormentors or judges to a degree. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm reading the Bible. I'm starting to have this like offer of a path to wealth. And it showed me how to do it for a business model. But I would have had to basically sell my soul to it. And I'm thinking, man, I must really be mad. I mean, here it is that Jesus Christ allegedly went through this same stuff, this 40 days in the desert, being tempted by the prince of this world. And here I am undergoing this same sort of thing. And it's like, you can't tell anybody this stuff's going on in your head. Nobody's going to believe you. They're going to think you're mad. I mean, I thought I was mad. So, I mean, I was going back and forth. And I was in
the same place. I couldn't tell anybody what I was learning either. Here I was, figuring these are real. I had nobody to talk to. I couldn't. The only people who understood were the schizophrenics. I could talk to them about it, but nobody else. So it puts you in a weird position where you know something, but you can't tell anybody.
So this offer went on for probably about a month and a half or so, and I was in a broken state. I mean, my income that year, I was below poverty level. My income was below poverty level that year. I was unemployed. I was dealing with the stigma of being diagnosed with affective schizophrenic disorder. It's like, how am I ever going to start my life again? So, I mean, the offer was tempting, but I felt like it's being made to me for a reason. Why is it making me this offer unless there's a different future if I don't take it? So I said no to it. And then it was almost like I was going through a series of stages, tribulations, or trials throughout this ordeal. So the next stage, and I felt like, as I said, I couldn't always tell if it was my voice or something from the outside. I was going back and forth, whether this was just my mind playing tricks on me or there was something actually externally attacking me.
And that's one of the things they have to figure out, is they have to understand what's their own voice and what the voices are telling them. They have to be able to ferret that out. And one simple way is the voices are always telling them something bad about themselves or somebody else, or their intent does not match that of the patient. You have to be able to figure out who's who, what's the voices and what are your thoughts. And that's a struggle. And if they're being told they're hallucinations, there's no way to do that. It's like trying to walk across a greased pig, or you just can't get anywhere.
The schizophrenic patient or target has to understand these are external of them. This is something from the outside that's doing this to them.
Yes.
So the next stage, it was really challenging to defend against. I started like defending myself against these things. I started attacking. I wouldn't say attacking them, but I acted almost like a defense attorney against them. So the next stage, it made me feel extreme guilt and shame, almost the end of ending my existence. It was pointing out all the crimes in life I'd ever committed. And by crimes, I'm talking about the most littlest things. One thing I kept pulling up was I used to go fishing as a kid, and you bait the earthworm to catch a trout, a bass, or a sunny. And it was making me feel so guilty for having killed an earthworm to catch a fish. Wow. And it would say, see, you're a horrible being, you're a horrible person. You killed this earthworm. And I would feel such extreme guilt for doing it. I mean, we're not talking a little bit of guilt. We're talking to the most extreme thing, like I didn't deserve to exist, like I should kill myself. And that's the thing about these negative thoughts. They want their targets or the victims to destroy themselves. That seems to be their objective.
So they went into his head and they got that incident. You didn't tell them that you used to fish, right? You didn't tell the voices, oh, I was a fisher. They got that from him. They got it from his memory, from his mind. They're energetic beings. They can go in there. They can pull that kind of stuff up. They can rub it in your face. And he spoke about how it made him feel killing the worm. That's exactly what they do. And once they generate that negative emotional energy, then they suck it off, and the guy's left depressed and eviscerated with no energy.
I couldn't get out of bed for days. I mean, it was just so difficult. I just felt so drained. And I remember it would list every morsel of meat I ever ate, every fly, ant, or worm that I killed, every flaw in my character. It's almost like it was using morality against me in a sense to make me not like myself, I guess. And I started arguing back to them. I said, okay, you know, God created me with teeth, tongue, and mouth. Do I not have the right to use them? I said, okay, why is meat made to taste flavorful and provides the most amount of proteotic energy per volume? I said, why does God encourage some animals to kill and eat other animals for sustenance? You're getting on me when there's a whole universe out there where other animals are eating other animals? I'm like, come on.
And this is probably the most important decision he made, is to fight back against them instead of just giving in and laying there and being kicked by them. He's turning around and using logic against them. You have to fight back against them. You can't just sit there and let them attack you.
I'm just listening to this conversation that they were having with you, Anon, and I'm thinking it's so hypocritical because they're basically feeding off you at the same time that they're calling you for
they're liars.
the ecosystem.
They gaslight. They're pathological liars. They will project. I mean, they definitely act like sociopaths, what we see in our society.
Yeah, they are. They're psychopaths.
Narcissists.
So I said to these very strong thoughts, I said, you know, take your arguments to God, not to me. And so I went through this stage, and then another stage would start later on, a few months later. So I'm approaching, I guess, early winter of 1991. And the next attack, it seemed like it was going up the managerial hierarchy with each different stage or tribunal. Like I was facing a greater attack. It was almost like, oh, that didn't work. They're trying something different on me to kind of get in. Now, the other key thing is these parasites, as Jerry calls them, they tend to go after people that have trauma, have had trauma, childhood trauma, early adult trauma. And I think those with trauma have, I guess they have cracks or fissures in their psyche, and that's a way for them to get in, to manipulate it.
And they feed on that. They feed on that trauma.
I came from a dysfunctional family situation. I didn't realize how traumatic or dysfunctional it was until I got out and started looking back. I mean, there was death in my family. There was narcissism, drug abuse, lots of stuff going on. And I always felt that education was my way out to get out of the situation. But you really don't realize the toll that those type of traumatic, dysfunctional family environments takes on you until you get older and you're able to look back on things and go, wow, that was not a normal state for a child to grow up in. So these parasitic entities, as we call them, they definitely tend to focus on people that have suffered trauma in their life, because I guess there's cracks in that person's psyche or the target of the victim, and that's why they tend to go after them. So the next stage, and as these attacks progressed, it was almost like I wasn't just defending myself. It's like I was defending all of humanity. It's like I was becoming a defense attorney or a liaison for the human species, the entire race. And it kept saying how worthless and pathetic humanity and I are. And this very strong thought or attack, it kept saying that we're insignificant lumps of flesh destined to rotting, being eaten by bacteria and worms. And I counter-argued with this particular prosecutor. I said, we were created that way by the divine hand. You know, we didn't decide the composition of our flesh, blood, and bones. It was granted or forced upon us. So I said in defense of these prosecuting attacks, I said, how can you condemn our form? We had no say or control over its creation. I said, take your arguments to God, for that's where you'll find the answers, not to me. And this was interesting. This attack backed off almost right away.
Oh.
I think this only went on for a week or two. I almost felt like it saw that my defense was strong, and it realized that their argument wasn't going to work in that case, and so it backed off. So I almost felt like I was being a defense attorney to deal with some of these attacks. And then a later stage would start. This was getting to, I guess, spring of 1991. Now, I was still seeing my counselor at this point in time, but I wasn't telling the counselor any of the stuff that was going on in my head, because I had at least the insight. I felt like if I tell them anything more extreme, they're going to change my drugs or put me on something else. I was on a low dose of Klonopin at this point in time. And I was dealing with more codependent issues that I had with my mom growing up. But there was so much more going on in my head that I was not revealing everything to my counselors. I felt like this was a spiritual battle that I was going through, and I needed to deal with this myself. I stayed away from all alcohol, all recreational drugs during this point in time because I knew my mind was not in the right state. And I also knew that I needed my mind in order to get through this. So the next prosecuting stage, it kept trying to convince me how I and humanity did not deserve to exist. It kept saying that human beings are worthless creatures. And it was almost like something had entered my mind. I was judging all of humanity based on my experiences. And it actually would pull in other experiences. I mean, it was almost like watching a movie. I would see flashes of images go by my eyes of like the brutality of different wars and battles throughout history, and different things that humans have done. It's like I was becoming its star witness. Like it was using what I witnessed of humanity against me in my arguments. I was becoming its star witness. And it would replay something from my memory or from human history in general, and it would say, see, humanity is an abomination. They will never evolve. They don't deserve to exist. This inquisitor kept saying that humanity and I are a worthless creation. We're a species that does not deserve its continuance of existence. And I would defend against these charges. I would say, yes, there are some humans that are evil, wicked, ignorant, and full of hatred. I said, but there are others that are good, compassionate, kind, and full of love. So I put forth my defense against this prosecuting attack. I said, you don't condemn an entire species, religion, or culture on being entirely imperfect based on the actions of a few. And then I would go through the next stage, or tribulation. Now, I don't know if these were initiations. I don't quite know. There's what was going on. There were so many different ways to interpret what I was going through. But keep in mind, I came from a generic Orthodox Christian background. So when this stuff started happening, I didn't know what to make of it.
I bet.
So the next stage, it kept saying, why even bother trying to guide humanity with any knowledge being given to you? They won't listen. They will never change. They'll only laugh and mock you. It'll be a failure from the start. And this is where it kept saying, if you tell anybody, they're just going to drug you up. You're going to be locked away in a psychiatric hospital for the rest of your life. Nobody's going to believe you. So it's like, who could I tell? Do I tell a priest about this stuff I'm going through? Do I tell my counselor? You don't want to tell anybody because you just feel like nobody's going to believe you. They're just going to be, you're mad. I had the diagnosis of having affective schizophrenic disorder. I was a loon. And they kept asking me, why do you want to tell anybody about your experiences? You'll be a fool. You'll be a failure from the start. And I said, you may be correct, but still I must try. They called me a fool many times. And I said, being the fool is my choice. And they said, well, why do you choose to be the fool? And I responded very simply back to them. I said, for the love of humanity. And this seems to come true many times in life because, when you try to expose a new reality or a greater truth to people, it's sometimes it's tough for them to accept that. It's like the allegory of Plato's cave. You're trying to show that there's a greater reality, there's a greater truth out there. But it means often that person has to kind of let go of their old thoughts or their old self. And that's very scary, and it takes courage to do that. So I was going through this stuff. There's a bunch of other tribunals that kept occurring. The final one, though, it was trying to destroy any faith or belief that I had in God or a higher power or whatever I felt was the ultimate God or definition of what God should or should be. It kept saying God doesn't exist. Give it up. There's nothing more to your existence than just this material world. There's no such thing as religion. Scripture is BS. I mean, it would go through all these things. It was like it was trying to destroy any fraction of faith that I had. Now, I was suicidal throughout this whole stages. I mean, I wasn't telling anybody that because I didn't want to be like locked up or sent away. But there were times I was actually preparing to kill myself with carbon monoxide poisoning. I was getting up the pipes in the garage. I was putting duct tape on it. But I had some younger nieces, so I had some compassion left in me because I realized, if I kill myself, it would give a permission slip to younger generations in my family to do the same thing if they face a tougher or difficult situation in life. So I chose not to do it really because of them, because I didn't want them to be able to use this as an excuse if they face a difficult life situation as well. So that their existence just saved me by the mere fact that it gave me some bit of compassion still left in me. And that's a positive emotion, something that these entities do not like. So finally, I was going through that final attack. This is approaching the end of summer of 1991, approaching into fall of 1991. And I started praying to God. I said, God, give me a sign. I said, I've been doing this stuff for a year and a half or so. I don't know if this is madness. I don't know if I'm being spiritually tested. I don't know if you're there or not. I hope you are, because I'm trying to make sense of what's going on here. I said, give me a sign. I don't care what it is. Just give me something. If you exist, if I'm to continue my existence in this world, if I'm to understand there's something much more profound than just pure madness in my head, I need to know. I mean, I was fighting depression. I was in debt. I was in debt. I was in very heavy chthonic territory. So about 2 weeks of the most intense possible praying that I could ever do, something happened, and it saved my life. And it actually helped me to turn around and to realize that I really was facing something. So I had a vision, is what happened. After about 2 weeks of praying and praying for God to give me a sign. And it occurred, probably started about 2 or 3 o'clock one morning. Now, I have a PowerPoint presentation that I can show of the actual vision that I saw.
Please do.
Okay, let me do a share screen, see if we get this to work. Okay, can you see the interior of a room here?
Yes.
So I mentioned I was praying to God to give me a sign that I need to know there's something much more profound going on. This wasn't just madness, and I wasn't just a lunatic. I wanted to know if this truly was a spiritual battle. So I woke up about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning after 2 weeks, the most intense praying to God that I ever did in my life. I felt like there was something in the room, a very intense presence. I looked around, I didn't see anything. I'm lying in bed, I look up, there's a square ceiling light fixture is over my head. And all of a sudden, I start to see this kind of like a fog or dark smoke start to enter the room. Now it's coming in not at the ceiling level, but maybe 6 inches to a foot below the level of the ceiling. And more of this fog or dark, thick smoke is starting to come into the room. It looked almost like it was forming a cloud. I remember
I've heard from other patients that the same exact thing. A black cloud like this appears. I mean, this isn't uncommon.
And at first I'm thinking, oh no, there's an electrical fog occurring in my light fixture. But I realized that's not where the wires are, and it wasn't moving like smoke. And then it dawned on me, oh great, I'm having a visual hallucination. I'm thinking, about a year ago, I'm diagnosed with having a schizophrenic disorder. Now I'm having a visual hallucination. Well, part of me was kind of curious. I'm like, okay, let's see what my mind's going to show me. If it's going to show me some sort of visual hallucination, let's see what it is. So I'm watching the smoke fill up the room, just lying on my bed looking up. And it moved like the way ink would move through water. It didn't move like smoke. Like smoke would come and go, tend to go up to the ceiling. This was almost like, I don't know if it was sentience itself, but it moved the way like dark ink would move through water. It was more fluid in its motions. So more and more the smoke that's coming into the room, it's almost like it's forming a cloud. And I start to see this like portal in the center of the cloud. It was kind of dark and oblong, and the portal's getting larger and larger, or gateway. And I realized that this fog is coming in from the inside edges of this portal that's forming. I couldn't see anything in the portal. It's very dark, but it's getting larger and larger and larger. So part of me is a little scared. It's like, okay, this is not normal. This shouldn't be happening, but it's just my mind playing tricks on me. That's the way I was interpreting it. But I said, okay, let's see what my mind's going to show me. The portal gets really large, or gateway, if you want to call it that. And all of a sudden, whoosh, I see these two serpentine tails move from bottom to top within the portal.
Wow.
I was a little taken aback, like, whoa, okay, what the heck is going on here? Now, they had a kind of a grayish underbelly, and the sides were kind of a glossy, dark black, scalish on both of the sides. And this thing moves from bottom to top within this portal that's opening up in my room within the center of the cloud area. And I see it move on by, and I'm kind of thinking, well, I'm safe enough for now because this thing's in this portal. It's on the other side of reality. It's not in my room. Well, I spoke too soon on that. So more and more of this cloud is coming, filling up. The cloud's still forming in the room. More and more of this fog is coming in, the dark smoke. I couldn't see the portal, but I knew it was still there. It was kind of obscured by this cloud. And then I see the serpentine movements within the cloud. I'm thinking, oh, great. Whatever this thing is, it's now in my room. And I could see the serpentine movements moving within the cloud back and forth, slithering almost like moving rather quickly. And then this cloud is obscuring the serpentine or snake-like movements, or worm-like, whatever you want to call it. The cloud's fully in the room. And I'm just watching, waiting to see what's going to happen next. And then this thing pops out of the cloud.
Wow.
It had a mammalian head. It was attached to kind of a serpentine or worm-like body. And it looked like almost there was two sets of spine or two sets of vertebrae. Like I've never seen like a seam down its side, almost like it would bring its two tails together when it moved. Now, I was expecting to see a snake head on this thing because it was a snake, what I saw in the portal. And it comes out with this mammalian head, like it's dog line-like from the side. I started laughing to myself. I'm like, okay, this is what my mind comes up with. I'm thinking, what else is going to come out of that cloud next? Some sort of a turtle with a rabbit's head on it, or a chicken on a lizard body. So it goes across my field of vision from left to right. Now, it's really interesting, Gabby. You mentioned the Nag Hammadi library and Gnosticism at the beginning of this, because I just discovered Gnosticism in about the last 3 years or so, and I've been reading up on it very intensely. I found this on the internet within the past couple of years.
Wow.
This is referred to as an Egyptian god called Anubis. So you're going back almost 4,000 years ago. But the Gnostics also refer to this as Abraxas, Yaldabaoth, or the Demiurge.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it has a mammalian face, a serpentine body, and you can see a split in this. This is an amulet from, I think, somewhere between the 1st to 4th century AD. And it looks like it has two sets of spines or two sets of vertebrae going down. That's very similar to what I saw coming out of that cloud that night.
Wow.
I just found this amulet this month online. Again, it's an image of Anubis. And if you look really closely, you can almost see the seam on even the side of this going down the side of it, almost like where it seemed like the two spines came together. It has like a lion or dog-like face.
Wow.
Very mammalian. So this entity comes farther into my room. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I was having a vision, a hallucination, or if this was actually materializing in my room. I can't 100% confirm either way. But then it turned and faced me. And it kind of looked like a beat up mangy cat or like a mangy lion. Like I could even see whiskers on his face. I mean, the details were very clear, whiskers, a stubble. It looked like its left eye had been kind of scratched out, like it had been in a cat fight or something. So I wasn't sure if it was blind in its left eye or not, but it definitely looked beat up. And I was frightened, but I was more kind of seeing this being something comical. You know, it's a snake with a lion head. I mean, what the heck is that? Then all of a sudden,
it's like
it comes at.
It's like something you just couldn't make up, Anon. Like it's just it's so
as
out
I said, there was no internet back
yeah.
then when this occurred. So then all of a sudden the face changed in the most horrible possible thing one could imagine. It became very wrinkled and prune-like. It looked almost like a withering old man or hag of decay. I don't know if his intention was to frighten me as much as possible, but I really thought this was the end of my existence. Every cell in my body for a split second was at the utmost sensation of terror and fright. And I remember thinking, you know, if I'm about to die here, this is not the way I want to go. I don't want to go out feeling this way. So I did a flip. I did something very different. I don't know if it was my own thoughts to do this, or if it was coming from a higher power telling me to do this. But what I did is I lowered my ego. I didn't fight or resist it. I felt like that would have been pointless. This thing was way more powerful than I. But I lowered my ego and I projected love onto it. That's all I had left in me. I wasn't going to be scared. I wasn't going to be frightened. I wasn't going to let it terrify me. I projected pure love onto it.
And what's interesting is schizophrenics are reporting that if they project love onto the voices run, if they're able to do that. A lot of them aren't able because the voices are so horrendous, but they don't like that projection that you're talking about. It like scalds them, it burns them.
And definitely,
and love is
love, you can't be in fear as well. So it's, you know, to make that choice, like just when you, like said, you flipped it there and on, you know, you've just moved into empowerment as well.
And love's a positive emotion. Yeah. And just as I did that, the entity pulverizes or disappears. It's like it vaporized, like it just went away. And I remember I was lying there saying, oh my gosh, I'm still here. The cloud's still there. The portal's still there. I'm trying to get my bearings straight to figure out what's going on. And all of a sudden, there's a new face hovering over me. Very different, though. There was fluttering going on, almost like wing-like movements behind it. It almost seemed like a being of consciousness with a face on it. Now, my artistry skills are not that great, but this face was the most beautiful thing I ever saw in my life. It was sheer beauty. And I'm lying there just looking at it, and I realized it wasn't aware that I was there yet. I was aware of it, but it wasn't aware of me. And I remember I could see like strands going on in the background, almost like it seemed like strands were releasing. There was definitely like fluctuations of energy, I would say, going on behind it. And looked like it definitely had like wings in the foreground, like fluttering a little bit. And part of me is saying, this is for another realm. I shouldn't be seeing this stuff. You know, I'm a mere mortal human. I'm not supposed to be seeing this stuff. And the face was not aware that I was there. I didn't know what was going to happen next. Part of me was wanting to get up out of bed and run out of the room, but the other part was very curious to see where this all goes. Then all of a sudden the face becomes aware of me. It was sheer beauty. I mean, undescribable beauty. It's the type of beauty that you felt like you had to turn, not look at, because it was beyond something that human eyes should even see. So we're just staring at each other. It was probably about 15 to 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. And I didn't know what was going to happen next. The flooding was going on. It's looking at me. I don't know if it was evaluating me. I don't know if it was judging me. But I was thinking, you know, that last entity that came in through the cloud with the serpentine body turned into something very horrible to look at and see. I thought this was going to do the same. I figured, okay, you're very beautiful now. Are you going to turn into something very horrendous and scare me afterwards? Yeah. So it's just looking at me like I don't know if it's judging me or it's trying to determine what I am, but we're just staring at each other. And after about 15 or 30 seconds, all of a sudden, it smiles at me. And it was a beautiful smile of grace. I could even see dimples forming in it. And when it smiled at me, I felt this huge wave of love, ecstasy, bliss, joy, understanding come from it. I mean, it basically told me that I was going to be fine, that my battles were coming to an end. And it was the type of ecstasy, it was erotic. And I don't say that in the physical sense. I say it in the erotic sense that I felt like we were somehow connected, like we were merging together. Now the cloud had dissipated, but the portal's still there. And I'm starting to have what one could describe as an out-of-body experience. I could feel myself rising out of my body, and I was merging with this entity. And simultaneously, I was in a state of pure ecstasy, absolute bliss. And this entity starts to go in reverse towards that portal in which that other entity came out of, and I'm having an out-of-body experience, and I'm merging with this entity at the same time with this beautiful faced whitish masked entity that's projecting pure ecstasy and love onto me. And we're merging together, and I'm rising out of my body, and it's like this entity and I are going into this portal together.
Wow.
And just as I'm about to cross over and 100% merge with this beautiful white-faced porcelain entity, now it was androgynous looking, but I really felt like it was of a feminine nature. And just as I was about to enter this portal and 100% merge with this beautiful white-faced entity, I fell back asleep. Or it put me to sleep. I don't know. I just remember I'm about to go into this portal, and all of a sudden I went out. Now, I woke up the next morning, probably about 6 or 7 a.m. I was in a state of religious shock.
I bet.
It's like, what had just happened?
An event.
But whatever happened, it saved me. Because here I was, my final battle of tribulation. Something was telling me that God doesn't exist. And then I had this type of divine experience. It basically negated what those negative voices were telling me. And so that experience occurred probably in, I guess, September, October 1991. But it was from that point onward that I started to heal as a human being.
Wow.
The strong thoughts or voices started to subside drastically. I was no longer suicidal at all. I mean, here it was, I was praying for God to give me a sign. My faith was being tested. I was about to lose all faith I had. And then I had this type of vision. Now, I've kept this to myself for almost 30 years. It's not something that you can go around telling people, but I'm getting used to doing that these days. I told my wife about this experience that I had. It was probably about 2004, before we got married. And she's a Roman Catholic, and she actually believed the experiences more than I did, ironically enough. So it came to the conclusion that what I was going through was very real. Those entities attacking me or whatever they were coming from the outside. Something was trying to take my soul, you might say. So it was definitely a spiritual battle. But upon having that vision, I knew that I had won. I knew that everything was going to be okay. And I still had a lot of work to do, but I think I crossed that threshold of realizing, okay, this is definitely a spiritual battle. This is not something my own thoughts are doing. It was something from the outside that was coming or attacking me or going after me. And there's a lot more to the story of what was going on, but that was the only time in my life that I had a visual hallucination like that.
Wow.
And now you mentioned Gnosticism at the beginning of this presentation, and I'm fascinated that you're aware of that, because I mean, as I read this stuff, I read the Non-Commodity Library for the first time last summer, and they talk about the archons, the principalities. So that snake-like entity could have been Yaldabaoth himself, the Demiurge, Abraxas, Chenubis. Some scriptures say he or she's a good thing. Other aspects of scriptures say he's not a good thing, he's evil. So it depends what you read. There's many different ways to interpret that sort of thing. The second entity, the one with the white porcelain-like masks, that could have been Sophia, as I referred to her, which is actually our part of our own soul. Yeah. It could have been my higher self, could have been Barbalo. There's so many different ways to interpret this stuff. And I'm not so sure that the Gnostics interpreted it correctly either. Carl Jung gets into some of this stuff too, but needless to say, my final conclusion is that schizophrenics are going through a spiritual battle. They need to have the help of, I guess, possibly a good shaman, maybe a good priest, and a good psychiatrist, because there's multiple things going on. the drugs that big pharma are prescribing for the long term, they do nothing to help the patient. They basically just muffle them. It's almost like, if you have an infectious wound, you don't just put a Band-Aid on it. You got to treat the infection underneath. And these tranquilizers do not treat the underlying spiritual infection that's going on.
Well, they're energetic beings, so they have to be tackled with an energetic therapy, and such a thing does exist. We've been using it for a year now, and it will get rid of the voices, or it will permanently get rid of them. But it takes a lot of work on the part of the patient. It's not as easy as taking a pill.
You've got to do the work. You definitely have to change to a more positive outlook, and that takes work to do. And as Jerry said, they'll do an exorcism on somebody, but it's only a temporary thing, because unless the target or the victim changes their outlook and how they deal with life, those entities are going to come right back again.
It's a frequency thing. Unless you increase your frequency, they're very low frequency beings, and that they want to drag you down to that level also.
No, I haven't been on any drugs for schizophrenia for probably at least 28 years. I think the last time I was on prescribed medication for it was 1992, and that was a low dose of Klonopin. And I've had some experiences in the last few years while reading the Nag Hammadi library. There were some audio hallucinations that I had. I call them hallucinations for lack of a better word, but I think there's something more profound going on. But the vision that I showed in the PowerPoint presentation, that is the only time in my life that I've had a visual hallucination like that. And as Jerry said, okay, well, hallucinations should be random. I should have seen a bunch of balloons flowing by, or unicorns, or daisies and butterflies. This is what I see. Something that was talked about 4,000 years ago, something the Gnostics knew about, very much so. So I think there's definitely more to our religions, the Bible and the scriptures out there. And unfortunately, we're not getting the whole story as human beings. I'm sure there's been a lot of suppression of really what's going on.
Well, it's being covered up because of we're supposed to be a scientific people now, so everything is science. But you read back in the Bible, there's like 23 times Jesus cast out demons out of people and they returned to normal. And all of a sudden now that psychiatry comes on the scene, demons don't exist, negative entities or evil spirits don't exist anymore because they say so.
I mean, I have a scientific mind, and I have to apply logic to accept this, because here it was, I'm praying to God to give me a sign. I have this vision that comes out of nowhere that I didn't know what this entity was until about 3 years ago.
Wow.
So I can only conclude using scientific mind. There's much more going on out there than meets the eye.
Absolutely. And it makes sense why they would have suppressed the knowledge of this, because if we're to understand the truth, and like you have, Anon, you've really broken through that whole paradigm of we're in a three-dimensional world and there's nothing beyond us. There certainly is. And there's, benevolent and both negative beings out there. Like once we can recognize that, we're no longer so controllable, because we can heal, we can take action and empower ourselves. But when we've sold out to the lie, or we've been deceived by this lie, it's so easy for them to control us and offer us medication, keep putting their propaganda over us with the mainstream media. And it's just accepted that, humanity is relatively sick. It's relatively unhappy. It doesn't really believe in, a creator or a bigger purpose. So, wow, what an experience.
Yeah, you look at the suicide rate in the United States, it's up around 50,000 people a year. That's as many people as died in Vietnam. Are we a better society because of all the drugs that these people are cranking out and putting into us? Those psychiatric drugs cure absolutely nothing. All they do is make these people rich. They suppress symptoms temporarily. There are other ways of dealing with this stuff that do result in a cure, but it does take some work, and we know what that is. We know how to do it. Of course, they're ignoring that. The people who come up with these energetic therapies have taken them to legislatures in Australia, and universities in Australia. They didn't want anything to do with it. They wanted to keep going with the same old bullcrap that doesn't cure anything. That's to keep the status quo. We're still making money off of this stuff, until they wake up and
sheer
realize,
greed.
Yeah, sheer greed. And not only that, those drugs, they have their place. I mean, like I said, there's some I've seen them. I've been there. I've been around them. There's some people that are so far out and so dangerous that the only thing you really can do is drug them silly, because they'll kill you. There's others that are, they won't do anything else. They won't listen to anything else. The only thing you can do is drug them down. But for the average guy, there is a way out of this without using these drugs forever. We've got a number of people who've recovered from schizophrenia, completely recovered. No more voices. They come back every once in a while, and they go, okay, yeah, I know who you are. Get lost. There is a way around it.
It's a spiritual battle. It takes work. It's not going to solve it by taking a pill. It's not going to do you any good. You have to work through your psyche. It requires some positive emotions such as love, forgiveness, gratitude, compassion. You got to reawaken those better aspects of yourself to get through this. And I was talking about the Gnosticism too. Some of the Gnostic scriptures actually mention that Yaldabaoth dwelling in a cloud.
Wow.
And so, I mean, there's a lot of similarities here when I was reading through this stuff. I'm like, wow, there's definitely more going on than just the material realm that we see. And the brain is just the material matter, the gray matter. But it's really like a radio. I mean, it's a combination of a tuner, a receiver, and a transmitter. And it's like there's thoughts out there. There's a sea of consciousness, and I think sometimes people are diagnosed as schizophrenic because I guess maybe the radio's off balance or needs to be properly tuned, or is a way to look at it. But the way to do that is through proper therapy, not just throwing a bunch of drugs on it. That's not going to do it, fix it at all.
And traditional therapy doesn't touch it because they are energetic beings. You can't just talk about the same problem over and over and over again and expect it to disappear. They didn't go anywhere. They're energetic beings. It requires an energetic therapy, and those have just come out. They've been around for probably 16 years, but they're being suppressed. They're not being allowed out. They're still pushing their drugs.
And it really needs that acknowledgement that this is, like you were saying, Anon, it's a spiritual battle, a spiritual challenge.
It is.
And these traditional therapies or medication doesn't take into account the spiritual whatsoever. And I thought it was interesting, Anon, how you were saying that so often this is because of experiencing trauma, particularly in childhood, can make us vulnerable to this kind of interference, perhaps because we've got cracks in our energetic field or blockages that they're attaching to. And with our supporters, a lot of them are survivors of ritual abuse and MK Ultra, and it's kind of the next stage of that. It's not just the trauma was accidental. These traumas have been given to these children, been abused very deliberately, and they've deliberately put these entities into the individuals so the attachments will actually run the mind control programs in these individuals. So that's the military and the government actually performing those horrific experiments on children. So the military and the government's aware of these Gnostic entities being out there, and they're using them against us.
Interesting enough, my mom did participate in MK Ultra as a volunteer. She was a nurse in Canada at the time, and they gave her LSD. But she said what happened is they gave her such a high dose of LSD that she kept throwing it up. So she said she never actually never went into her system, and they actually disqualified her from the program because she wasn't able to keep the LSD in her system. So she got out of it, but she volunteered to do it because they were presenting this as this is a benefit for society. It's a medical study. She was a nurse in Canada, just trying to do good thing to help out a little bit. They gave her a bunch of acid, and she threw it up, so it never actually went into her system. But it took me a while to put two and two together. Realized that was MK Ultra.
Wow, incredible. And we do know that those kind of things with abuse and even with drugging, it is often passed down to the children as well, both genetically and probably on a spiritual, energetic level as well.
Possibly, I'm hoping that she didn't get overwhelmed by it or anything like that. As I said, she when they gave her the LSD, she said she threw it up. It never went into her bloodstream or anything else like that, according to her. So hopefully they didn't get into me through her.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I just, thank you so much for sharing your story today, Anon. I just think, it's so courageous, and it's really helping us all see, this new paradigm and understand that it's very much, it's not a three-dimensional world that we live in, that we've been told there's a lot out there, and, we need to be aware of that and arm ourselves with the truth so we can heal and, be aware of the control systems in this world so we can, create a future outside of this mind control as well. So I think what you're doing is incredible. And the same with you, Jerry, just to, really be a whistleblower on this whole awful psychiatric system that was very much set up, the whole mental health around the world by Tavistock. And it was, about control and indoctrination and keeping people sick. So it's so brave that, these voices, your voices, are coming forward at this time to let people know you can heal, and, this is the truth. And by understanding that, these were lies that we've been told and indoctrinated in, we all have the opportunity now to heal and to understand each other better as well. So thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And if I just may, I did write a book. It's called Revelations on Interstellar Highway 10. It's kind of part of my healing pattern, and it's more about religious experience and religious exploration. So if your audience is interested, I do have a website. It's astroxrising.com, and it talks a little bit about the book, but it's part of my exploration into religion, the Orthodox, the Gnostic, some Buddhism, because I was trying to figure out things in life too, in this world. And it was through writing this book that I discovered a lot of this stuff in the Gnostics. And I only knew Jerry for about 6 months ago because I saw the work that he was doing on schizophrenia. So I reached out to him to say, hey, I've been there, and you're right on what you're finding out here. That's absolutely correct. These are external entities of ourselves that are trying to somehow go after the human race.
Wow, well done.
On my end, Sherry and I have written this book. If you want to know more in detail about what the voices are and how they operate, and a little bit about what you can do about them, it's in here. It also kind of gives you a summary of what psychiatry actually is and what they've been historically. They haven't cured anything in decades. I have a website. My name it's jerrymarzinsky.com. I work with schizophrenics, and we've got a handful that have completely cured. So it is possible. A number of the others have gotten better. So there is a way to deal with this. There is hope. It's not a life sentence like the psychiatric mafia tells you.
I love that. I'll pop the links to both of your books in the video comments so everyone can reach out and get a hold of them. I'm loving Jerry's, and I look forward to reading yours and on too. So yeah, just a massive thank you for all that you're doing and all of the awareness that you're bringing around these very taboo topics. And let's hope, by having these conversations in our communities, we can really generate healing, both for individuals and also the collective. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's been our pleasure,
Thank you for having us.